In the last video, we looked at how airlines construct their fare structures and why there are so many fares from the same airline in a given market. And we ended up with something that looks like this, a demand curve with more than one price point. So let's just take a quick review. We started out by saying, well, what if the airline only had one price, P1? Well, the demand curve tells us that at price P1, the airline would sell Q1 seats, and let me try to choose my pen here, Q1 seats, and at that price and quantity, the airline would be able to capture this amount of revenue. Remember, the revenue is equal to price times quantity, and price times quantity is represented by this rectangle under the curve. And then we said, well, that's how we would maximize revenue if we had only one price in the market. We would find the price that maximized the size of this rectangle, but we could capture even more revenue if we added prices. So the airline would add a lower price, P2, and capture this additional revenue here from customers who were only willing to pay P2, and they would capture this additional quantity. And then they would also add a higher fare. So for those customers who are willing to pay more than P1, they'd be willing to pay Q3. The airline would capture this additional rectangle of revenue here. So the total revenue that the airline would be able to capture with this fare structure, with three fares in the market, would be the sum of the areas of all these rectangles, and that would be easy to add up. Now they are still leaving some money on the table, so there's still some consumer surplus here. So customers along the demand curve above this point here would be willing to pay more than P3, but they would get the seats for P3. Similarly, customers who would be willing to pay more than P1 would get the seats for P1, and same thing for customers who are willing to pay P1 but bought the seats for P2. And then down here there is some demand that won't be satisfied because there's no fare in the market that these customers would be willing to pay, and they wouldn't travel at all. So this theory works pretty well. We can see that adding prices to the market will capture a greater portion of the revenue opportunity. But there's a fairly obvious problem here too, right? While we called these customers in the last video, I think we called this customer X, and maybe these customer Y, and these customers Z. In reality, there are customers who are willing to pay P3 for the seat. They would prefer to pay a lower fare. And while we have these X customers who are willing to pay P1, they would rather pay P2. So these customers are really have different willingness to pay, but they're not so independent that these customers wouldn't buy the other product, that the X customers wouldn't buy the Y product. They prefer to pay a lower fare. So in order to capture all of this revenue opportunity, the airline needs some way of segmenting the market. So if they just put these three prices out there, well, as soon as the lower price hit the market, all of the seats would be sold at that fare. So the airline needs some way to prevent customers who are willing to pay a higher price from buying lower price seats. So they need to find a way to get the Z customers to only pay P3 and not to purchase the same product at a lower fare. And the way they do this is something that I'm sure you'll be familiar with, is they add pricing restrictions. Okay, pricing restrictions. They also call these fences. So they put fences around the lower fares so that higher fare customers won't be able to buy them. And these restrictions are the things that you see in the airlines markets all the time. There are advance purchase advance purchase. So you might have a, let's say let's change colors here, 21 day AP, advanced purchase requirement. Or you might have the minimum stay. So maybe your most restrictive fare has a Saturday stay requirement. So to qualify for this fare, you have to purchase it 21 days in advance of departure, stay over a Saturday night, and this would be a round trip fare. So that's one way they could put, and let's say that's the restrictions on this lower fare. So to qualify for the lowest fare in the market, the P2 fare, the customers would have to meet the highest restrictions. So they'd have to purchase their ticket 21 days in advance. They'd have to stay over Saturday night, and then purchase a round trip. And in this way, the airline is attempting to capture the segment of the market that's very price sensitive and keep those customers who are less price sensitive on this portion of the demand curve from purchasing those tickets. And these low fare customers tend to be more the leisure customers who make their plans in advance. They stay at their destination over the weekend because that's how they plan their vacations. And of course, they generally go and come back to the same place that they originated their travel. On the other end of the spectrum, the highest fare customers tend to be the least flexible. They tend to be business customers. Their meeting schedule and their business plans don't firm up so far out that they can make their purchases 21 days in advance. They generally don't like to stay over a weekend. They like to get to their destination and come back before the weekend, and that will prevent them from purchasing or qualifying for the lowest fare. And then in the middle here, there's some combination of the two. So maybe this is a 7-day AP and a 3-day minimum stay. So in the middle here, you have customers who are not quite as flexible as these real price sensitive vacationers, but also have some more flexibility than the business customers. So by putting these fences around these different fares, the airline is able to, to some extent, segment the market into different types of customers. And in economics, we would call this price discrimination. So let me choose a different color down here, pink, I think, and price discrimination. And price discrimination is what happens when you can segment the market and charge different prices. So price discrimination is basically when a firm, when a firm charges different prices to different customers for the same product. So different prices in the market, different customers are paying those different prices, but they're getting the same product. Now, the airlines will construct these products in a way, or these fares in a way, that they can be seen as different products, right? Because the P3 fare is much more flexible than the P2 fare. So the product that the airline is selling is the flexibility to manage your travel from point A to point B. From a consumer's perspective, they generally see the product as the seat. The seat or the ability to get from A to B in that seat. So they see that there's different customers on the plane paying different prices, but all getting the same product. Either way, it's price discrimination, which is a legitimate way that firms will try to maximize revenue and maximize profit. And actually, there is a portion of the market that really benefits from price discrimination, right? Because when we only had P1 and we said that was the optimal price for a market that only had one fare. So if the airline was only able to charge one price and there was no segmentation, no price discrimination, There would only be one price. Well, these customers would actually benefit. The P3, the Z customers who are willing to pay P3 would actually benefit because they'd be paying a lower price than they would be willing to pay. But the Y customers in this structure wouldn't be able to travel at all because they're not willing to pay P1. So anyone along this portion of the demand curve down here would not be able to travel at all in this market because there's no price that they'd be willing to pay. So price discrimination is good for the airline. It benefits some portion of the market by providing lower fares that otherwise wouldn't be available.